Buenos días con todos. I'm Maria Rosa Vaquerizo. I'm the CEO of the Andean American Associations, and I would like to give a very warm welcome to today's program that is hosted and organized by the Ecuadorian American Association. The program is Ecuador's Minister of Production, Foreign Trade, Investment, and Fisheries, Julio José Prado, with Ernesto Revilla of Citigroup. We're grateful to the Minister and Mr. Revilla and to all of you for participating. The Ecuadorian American Association was incorporated in the US in 1932, and that makes it really the first chamber of commerce for Ecuador in the US. Our association has hosted hundreds of programs, and we are celebrating our 90th anniversary this year. We welcome a distinguished list of participants this morning, including Nelson Baldión of Global Consulting Solutions, our EAA Director, Pablo Vallejo, General Manager of Banco Pichincha Miami Agency. They are a leadership circle member, and representatives of several governments. Also, we have with us today major financial institutions, Asobanca, Citi, State Trust, UBS. We also have multinational organizations and key institutions. We have the Ecuadorian American Chamber of Commerce, International Labor Organization, International Monetary Fund. And as rating agencies, we have today with us SP Global. In the media, we have Business Forum and Ecuador News One. Welcome to each of you, and thank you so much for your interest in our programs. And please note that our speakers' remarks are their own views and are not expressions or positions of the Ecuadorian American Association, which is apolitical. What is important to notice is at the bottom of the screen, there's a Q&A button, and for the Q&A session following the presentations, we will be reading your questions. So feel free during the conference to write your questions. They will be read at the end, 20 minutes really before the program. Now, it's a pleasure to present the president of the Ecuadorian American Association, Juana Caicedo Selinger. She's the Senior Vice President at UBS Financial Services in New York. Juana, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Maria Rosa. Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Minister Prado, Ernesto Revilla, and to you all. It is my pleasure to introduce briefly our speaker and moderator. You may refer to our invitation for further information about them. Minister Julio José Prado has been a leader and consultant for competitiveness development and industrial innovation projects for both private companies and governments on local and national levels. A member of the MOEC network of competitiveness at the Harvard Business School since 2008. He's an author of the book, From Shock to Action, Mindset and Indispensable Tools to resurface and adapt in the midst of chaos. In the past few years, he has been in charge of the Association of Private Bank of Ecuador, Asobanca, where he led a process of institutional transformation. Since 2019, he has been part of the Latin American Committee of Financial Innovation of the Latin America Bank Federation, FELABAN. An expert in business matters, he has been acknowledged as one of the 50 most distinguished professors of Latin American Business School by America Economia magazine. Mr. Ernesto Revilla is a managing director and head of Latin American economics at Citigroup. He joined Citigroup in 2015 as a Mexico economist. Before, he has a 12-year career at Mexican Finance Ministry, where he was a chief economist. In that position, Mr. Revilla headed microeconomic planning, coordinated Mexico National Development Plan, served as advisor to the minister and participated in budget negotiation. Earlier, he was an economist at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. And now Mr. Revilla will begin the discussion. Ernesto. please.
Thank you so much, Juana, for that introduction. Thank you so much, Maria Rosa. It's really an honor to be here with everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. As I said, it's really a pleasure and an honor to be sharing this forum with the Ministro Julio José Prado. Thank you so much, Minister, for your time. There's a lot of interest from domestic investors, foreign investors on Ecuador, and it's really great to have you to start this conversation about Ecuador and especially the prospects going into 2023. Which we are fast approaching. Let me start, Minister, by asking you an update on what's happening on the trade front, what's happening on the free trade agreement with Mexico on discussions. We've been receiving many questions about the shrimp industry, the banana industry, what's happening in all of these fronts. I think it would be great to start with just a quick update on your side, and we can take it from there. Thank you so much again.
Hi, Ernesto. Hi, all. Thank you for having me here in this very important forum. I'm really happy to share everything that I can with you during this brief meeting that we will have during this morning. And let's start with that, Ernesto. So one of the key pillars of our strategy called Ecuador Competes, which is our competitive strategy, is to open up our economy. So why is this so important for Ecuador? Well, it's important for every single country in the world, but especially for Ecuador, it's important because roughly 40% of our export products are covered at the moment by tariffs, reduction of tariffs of free trade agreements in the world. So roughly 60% of our export at this very same moment are not covered by FTA, of tariff reductions in the world. So we might have some of the best products in terms of quality in the world, the best bananas, the best shrimps, some of the best cut flowers, the best tuna in the world, but we don't have the best market access. So this is creating all sorts of problems for our industries in terms of competitiveness, cost competitiveness when we go to other markets. So I will tackle that probably a little bit later, but I just wanted to know that there's a very important strategy to open up the market and to negotiate at least 10 new free trade agreements over the course of this government, these 4 years that we will be here in government with President Lasso. And we have started in a very dynamic, pretty fast way to negotiate those trade agreements. So the first one is Mexico. And at the moment, as you all know, Mexico is about to finish with the trade negotiations. It's a very important trade agreement, not only because of the Mexican market, but because as well of the benchmark, the international benchmarks that we are agreeing to have in these trade agreements are really important in terms of services, investments, trade protection, investment protection, and so forth, so on. So those are really important key issues for us. What's the next step with Mexico? So at the moment, we're just waiting for an answer from the Mexican negotiating team in terms of the market access for two very important products for Ecuador. So shrimps and bananas. And as we have said, we cannot close a trade negotiation with any country in the world, specifically with Mexico in this case, without having some sort of market access for those two products. So until recently, those products were excluded from this trade agreement, and for us, this is a red line. So we have to see some sort of inclusion, using quotas, any sort of access to the market, and that's what we are discussing at this very same moment with Mexico, Ernesto.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for the update, Minister. This is exactly what we were looking for in terms of the update. Is there any timeline in your mind? Do you envision this happening in 2023, in a couple of months, or take longer? Is there some sort of specific points in the calendar that we should be paying attention to?
With Mexico?
Yes.
Okay, well, so with Mexico, this is just a decision that needs to be taken at the highest level. So at the moment, this decision should come from President López Obrador. And what we should have is a proposal in which we can see that we're not affecting, or endangering the producers from shrimps and banana in Mexico. We understand the sensibilities, the political and productive sensibilities in those two sectors, but at the same time, we need to have a minimum access to the market. So what I cannot explain in detail which is the offer, of course, because we're negotiating, but what we're trying to do is to, instead of replacing production from Mexico in those two sectors, in those two areas, we want to replace imports from Mexico, both in banana and in shrimp area. So we want to compete with other countries that are exporting to Mexico, not with the Mexican producers of shrimps and bananas. So to have a market access based on a small quota for us would be a first good step to retake to join that market and to start negotiating again. But there are great news, Ernesto, with Mexico. The negotiation is 99% ready at this very same time. So if we manage to find a way to have this market access for shrimps and bananas, it will be done. So that's it. At the moment, we were expecting to have a meeting between President Lasso and President López Obrador in Peru, and Pacific Alliance meeting that was going to take place tomorrow, actually, in Peru. But of course, this has been canceled for obvious reasons. So hopefully next year, at the beginning of year, the 2023, we will have another meeting within the presidents and the ministers from the Pacific Alliance, and hopefully we will have time to talk about how Ecuador can access the Pacific Alliance and what we'll have to do to finish the trade negotiation with Mexico.
That would be fantastic, Minister. Thank you so much for the update. Before moving to other topics under your portfolio, which is a big portfolio in terms of production, foreign trade, industry, fisheries, just to finish on this topic of free trade agreements, you mentioned 10, which is the objective before the end of the administration. Mexico is very important, is the first that we should expect something. Can you give us a little bit of an overview of the rest in terms of timeline and priorities that you have for Ecuador?
Sure, Ernesto. Can I share a quick slide so that everyone can see? If you can give me the permits to do it.
Yeah, let me ask the technical hosts to give permit to the minister.
Yeah, still not ready, but okay, that's it. Yeah, I have the permit now. So you should be seeing my slide there. Okay, so just this one, just a couple of slides. So this is Mexico, no? At 99% done. It's really close to be fully completed. 18 out of 20 different working tables are completely closed. The only two that we need to close are market access and commercial defense. So those two. Last week, we have finished the negotiations, and this is something that I haven't been spoken about, but we have finished the trade negotiations with Costa Rica because up until last week, the advancement was 85%. But my negotiating team was in San Jose last week, and finally, we have finished these trade negotiations. So we will announce to Ecuador that we have finished by the end of this week. We're just getting some very specific points that need to be discussed, but it's finished. At this very same moment, we're also negotiating the last part of this trade agreement with China. This is really important for Ecuador. It's a very, it's a very large country, of course, very sensitive for our manufacturing industry. But we have managed to do a very quick, a very efficient, negotiation with China. And we will announce by the end of this week as well everything that is done and finished with this trade negotiation. So probably we will have a little bit more discussions on some products in terms of market access, some Ecuadorian products that have to gain a bit more of market access to China, but it's almost done as well. So I would say that at this moment, it's probably around 98% finished, the trade negotiations with China. And with Korea, the advancements at this very same moment is higher than 60%. 60% because we are going to finish and have a new trade round at the beginning of next year in Seoul. And hopefully we will finish that trade agreement by the end of March next year. So those are the four FTAs that we are negotiating at the same time at the moment. And great news with Costa Rica and China, we are going to finish by this very same month, and Korea by March next year. And the next steps are Canada. We have managed to open what it's called the preliminary talks with Canada. We can say that this is the first zero of our trade agreement with Canada, and hopefully by May or June next year, we will start the official negotiations of a free trade agreement with Canada. With the United States, we are moving in stages. So the first stage has been to sign a trade protocol that includes, trade regulations and trade openness in different areas. But it's very complicated at this moment because the political willingness to start a free trade agreement, especially in the Congress in the United States, is not really there. So even if you ask me which are the priorities in terms of having a trade agreement with different countries in the world, of course, United States is in the top priorities, but at the moment there's no possibilities to start the negotiations of an FTA. With Panama and the Dominican Republic, the conversations are going really well, and hopefully we will start the negotiations next year. Those could be finished in 2023. With Israel, we signed an MOU at the beginning of this year. We're moving quite well with Israel, and hopefully next year we will start the trade negotiations. And with Singapore, we're just starting, the conversations, and hopefully we will start an FTA in a year or a year and a half. So these are roughly the 10 free trade agreements, and also if you put here the Pacific Alliance, those are the 10 that we're negotiating at the very same time, Ernesto.
Fantastic. I'm happy that you were able to share those slides, because that really made it clear what we were talking about, these potential 10 free trade agreements, which is very refreshing to see as a reform strategy, development strategy in a country, especially when the world is going more inward looking, more protectionism in many countries, more nationalism. And it's great to see that there's some reform agenda somewhere, because we know that the potential for growth in economies of opening up is huge in terms of growth and development. Minister, let me turn a little bit to the global picture. The prospects for 2023 are, of course, difficult for emerging markets, because we see global growth is slowing down. This is a consequence of a lot of monetary tightening across the world, particularly by the Fed. So in the case of Ecuador in particular, which is, of course, a dollarized economy, let me ask you about the implications of what are you seeing in the short term. And let me tell you what are we seeing in Citi, for example, which is similar to what the market is pricing in. Right now, the interest rate by the Federal Reserve is at 3.75%. We expect it to go all the way up to 5.25% to reach it in May. So we still have some more monetary tightening, of course, by the Fed to control this inflation, which is the highest in 40 years. And what this means in terms of the dollar is a stronger dollar around the world, and probably less competitiveness for dollarized economies such as Ecuador. So my question to you is, in this context of a strong dollar, of US monetary tightening, is this the right time to open up to the world when competitiveness, maybe it's not the strongest that you will have in the next following years? Or how do you see the short run versus the medium run in terms of this strategy?
Yeah, great question, Ernesto. There's never a right time to open up the market. It's just something that small countries like Ecuador need to do. and we need to think in the medium and long term, because every single variable that we might see, in some cases, there will be good variables for Ecuador, and the perspectives in terms of growth could be not really good at the moment because of what's going on in the world. But nevertheless, this is a strategy in which we believe that Ecuador needs to be involved to opening up the market, bringing more foreign direct investments, reducing the costs of production. So all those things are part of this Ecuador open for business and Ecuador competes strategy that we're following. So addressing and tackling the issues that you have brought, which are really, really important. I'm also going to share a couple of slides so that you can understand what we are seeing in Ecuador. So first of all, in terms of GDP growth, so let me share this GDP slide here. You all know these figures, but just to follow the argument here with me. So first of all, this year, Ecuador, we have these are IMF projections, no? Fondo Monetario Internacional. So here's Ecuador, 2.9%. So compared to other countries and the average in Latin America, we are growing less than the rest of Latin America. Nevertheless, we do think that by the end of this year, so in December, this same month, we will see that Latin America is not growing as fast as the IMF has expected, and Ecuador is going to grow higher than the IMF has expected. So why is this? Because our export performance in the world, which we will go into a moment. But going with your question, Ernesto, what's going to happen with interest rates? And how is this going to affect our trade competitiveness all over the world? So you know that there's two factors when we talk about trade competitiveness. So first of all, the inflation rate, of course, and the inflation rate in Ecuador is one of the lowest, not only in Latin America, but one of the lowest in the world at this very same moment. So this creates competitiveness for our products when they are exported abroad. On the other side, the bad news is that since the dollar, we have a strong dollar at the moment, and many countries are depreciating or devaluating their currencies, of course, we lose competitiveness. At the end of the day, the real value of competitiveness, of exchange competitiveness at this very same moment is positive for Ecuador. And we can see that when we see how our exports are performing all over the world. So I'm going to share as well. Again, let me share. Are you seeing my screen here?
Yes, we're seeing it.
Okay, so these are the main exports for Ecuador. So you can see here the non-oil exports are growing at 23%. So this is the highest level we have ever had in our history of exports, not only exports. By the end of this year, if everything continues like this, at the end of this month, this year, 2022, we will have the highest level of non-oil exports that we have ever seen in Ecuador, more than $20 million or $20 billion in exports. And in many countries, you can see in China, for example, our exports are growing higher than 83%, United States 60%, the European Union a bit less because of the crisis and everything there, 4%, Colombia 23%, and only Russia is declining as our main trade partner because of the war from Russia in Ukraine. But nevertheless, we are performing really well in all of our on most of our most important markets, and this is because we have excellent products. The currency devaluation or depreciation in other countries has been hitting hard in some of our export countries, but luckily we have one of the lowest inflation rates in Latin America. So this is boosting as well our exports to the world. So I don't know if this answers the question, Ernesto.
Very much. Thank you for those slides. And by the way, let me complement. You already put the growth forecast for Ecuador, which looks relatively well compared to Latin America. Let me tell you, our inflation forecast is that it will come down very quickly in 2023. We expect this year inflation to close at 4%, next year at 2%, and maybe in 2024 closer to 1%. So that will help in the competitiveness angle. Minister, let me continue in this competitiveness discussion and talk about the specific of unit labor costs. Would you agree that Ecuador has become a little bit more expensive in terms of labor cost compared to other peer countries? Does your ministry share this diagnostic or not necessarily? And is the government thinking about this dimension, or how do you see the prospects going forward for labor cost for Ecuador?
Yeah, absolutely, Ernesto. So there are two sides here of the costs related to labor in Ecuador. Of course, what President Lasso has decided, not only now, but since he was a candidate, presidential candidate, is that he wanted to raise the minimum salary in Ecuador. So he has done this twice. And of course, there are some, a lot of sectors, especially manufacturing sectors and agricultural sectors, that are not very happy with this policy. But this is something that has been announced for the last year. So it doesn't come as a surprise for some of those countries, even if they don't fully agree with what we are doing in the government. So what do we need to do right now in order to increase the productivity of the labor in Ecuador? So there are two ways to tackle this from the public policy. So the first one is to send a reform, a legal reform, a very important legal reform to the National Assembly to change the laws, because we do know that in Ecuador it's very expensive to hire, it's very expensive to lay off some of the workers, and this has created all sorts of problems in terms of having more formal workers being included to the labor sector, and it created all sorts of problems in terms of costs of production for our sectors in Ecuador. So this is competitiveness for us as well. But the thing is, at this very same moment, to see that we can send a new labor reform and to the National Assembly is going to be really, really difficult. So there's no political willingness in the National Assembly to discuss nothing like this. So it could be even worse if we send a bill there, and it would be, totally changed in the National Assembly for worse. So what's the way that we're going to move forward? We already have put together a team, an international team and local team to discuss where do we have a space to change some of the norms, the secondary laws that doesn't need to go through the National Assembly to implement changes in the labor conditions in Ecuador. We already have seen that we can find very important spaces to improve, to reduce costs, and to introduce more flexibility to some of these sectors. And this is something that we are going to do starting next year, because we already have all the information that we need to start this process. So that's the way we're going to move forward, Alvaro, in the next Ernesto, sorry, in the next months with these reforms.
Very interesting. Thank you so much, Minister. That's very helpful to know what's happening on the labor front. You touched the difficulty of reforming with difficult politics, which is true for every country in the world. And let me put that on hold for a little while. We will discuss politics for sure. But before getting there, let me talk a little bit and ask you about the energy sector. And I remember President Lasso had an objective at one point of doubling oil production from the current 500,000 barrels a day to close to 1 million barrels a day of production. Is that objective still on the table? What is the view of the government regarding oil production and what's happening in the oil sector?
Yeah, it's not specific in my area, but from what I've been discussing with both the Minister of Oil and Gas and Energy, Fernando Santos, and both with the President, Guillermo Lasso himself, is that there's been a delay, in setting that goal. So it will not be reached by the end of this period, this government period, but they are trying to, increase the production from Petroecuador, which is the national, enterprise in charge of petroleum. But the big strategy here is to bring more foreign direct investments to our country through public-private partnerships and concessions. That is something that we're moving really fast to secure. And hopefully by June next year, so within the next semester, we will see that many important firms are going to come to Ecuador, both in the oil and gas industry, the energy industry, traditional energy, and also in the mining sector. So those three areas are the most important ones in which we're trying to replace, public investments and replace that with international partnerships and private investments in our country. So, but to answer your question, that goal of doubling up the production has been a little bit delayed. I don't know by how many years, but it won't be possible to do it in the way that we were thinking about in the first time.
Got it. Thank you, Minister. And now that you touch the mining sector, it has been years now where people generally understand that mining has a huge potential, of course, in Ecuador to become one of the main engines of growth. What is your outlook on the mining sector, and anything that we should watch about this sector in particular?
Yes, Ernesto. We have been discussing with some of the largest, players in the mining industry, which at the moment are not present in Ecuador, or are trying to do, businesses and trying to find opportunities in our mining sector. Sadly, Ecuador, compared to, to Peru, to Chile, and to other countries in the world, is coming really late in this race towards mining. But we think that that's a good thing for us in Ecuador, because we have opportunities to attract those big firms that have not been interested in coming to our country in the last decades, and they are coming to our country. They are interested in doing more exploration projects, and hopefully to start, the exploitation later. So I will also share some data with you, which is the data that I can give you as a first hand in our ministry, which is the investment contracts that we had signed with different sectors. So let me give you a bit of background of these investment contracts before seeing this slide here that shows how many those sectors are attracting. But first of all, this is the investment contract law. We have changed that last year. So at the moment, a firm that wants to get these investment protection contracts can benefit from a reduction in the income tax of 3 percentage points without an investment contract. So any single firm, that an entrepreneur, a business people that wants to invest in Ecuador, they will get a tax rebate of 3%, no matter what, for up to 15 years. But if they get an investment contract, they will get a deduction of 5 percentage points in those investments up to 15 years. If those concessions are tied to a longer term, for example, in the mining contracts, you usually 15 years is a very small contract, but for those mining contracts or oil companies, usually those concessions could take 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, or 50 years. You will get those reductions for the time that you have your concession. A waiver in terms of the outflow tax, the impuesto salida de divisas that we have here in Ecuador, which is slowing down, but nevertheless, until we have completely reduced to zero that outflow tax, you will get a reduction, and also a reduction in terms of exception of imported capital goods and raw materials in tariffs and all of that if you import machinery. So the firms in a country have been using these investment contracts for the last decade, really, since those were created in the last former government. But at the moment, you can see here that there's a boom in companies that are using this legal framework in order to profit from, not only these tax rebates, but also the way that you can have these contracts protected in the long term. So this gives a lot of stability and certainty that the laws in which you have signed, with which you have signed your contracts, will not change in the near future, which is something that, of course, is something really important for the investors. So which are the main areas in which those trade contracts have been signed last year and this year. So here are some important sectors. So the industrial sector, 18%, the mining sector, 70%, the energy sector, 16%, especially the renewable energy sector, and other sectors like agriculture, manufacturing, and all of these are also areas in which we are seeing both local investments and also international investments that are really interested in investing in those areas in Ecuador.
This is very important, Minister. Thank you so much, and very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. And 2022 has been a great year, and we hope that momentum continues. The data you showed was very, very impressive. Let me turn to a final question on my side before we open it up for the Q&A for everyone joining today. Let me remind you that you can ask a question on the Q&A button on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Before going to that, I said, Minister, that I was going to ask you about politics, because one of the things that we get a lot right now about Ecuador is that you have probably the best economic fundamentals that we've seen in the last 10 years in terms of the strength of economic growth, of the quality of fiscal policy, of the reduction in the fiscal deficit, external accounts, and so on. And yet we still have a lot of political uncertainty. And in your portfolio, you have, of course, the challenge of attracting investment to Ecuador, given all the potential that you just talked about. How does the government face the challenge of attracting, of bringing in investment under such a difficult political scenario, not only in Ecuador, but in the region, of course? What's the disconnect between economic fundamentals and politics that you have to deal with, and how do you solve that challenge?
Yes, that's always a difficult question, Ernesto, because we can do a lot of things from the government and from our ministries in order to have this new development strategy, this new framework, and put it together, and implement it really quick. But nevertheless, there are some political forces, and social forces that do not want to see this model to succeed. So what are we trying to do? We do think that if we manage to introduce some locks, some changes in our public policy, in our laws, that allows us to show the world, and especially international investors, that this new framework, this new development policy that we're trying to tackle in Ecuador is not only going to be here for the next couple of years during this government with President Lasso, but it's going to stay here in the long term. That's going to attract a lot more FDI that we have been attracting in the last years and the last decades in Ecuador. So which are those locks? Which are those changes that are really important? So first of all, that's why we are trying to have so many free trade agreements, because those are supranational laws. Those are trade agreements that are not really easy to change. If there is a new government that wants to, get rid of those FTAs, they could do it, but it's not so easy. The other part is to sign new investment protection contracts, which will also give the certainty to those firms that in any case, whether we are with this government or a new government in the near future, you will have the protection of an investment contract. And the other thing is that we're also negotiating bilateral investment agreements with many countries in the world. So it's not only about free trade agreements, it's also including in those trade agreements investment clauses that will protect those international investments in case of discrepancies with the local governments or with the national government for that matter. But at the end of the day, it's true, but that we can do and propose many changes in Ecuador. And if we don't have a good political framework and social framework in our country, this will hamper our objectives of attracting more FDI to the country. Nevertheless, I do think that given the condition that we see in other countries in Latin America, so this is not only a problem in Ecuador. We have problems, social unrest, political unrest in many countries. We have seen this in Peru. We saw this recently in Chile. So it's not only Ecuador that is going through this political unrest and social unrest, but nevertheless, we think that we have an opportunity at the moment to fulfill our goals in the short term, to sign these trade agreements, the bilateral agreements, to change some of the norms that we're trying to change, both in the labor front, in the social front, and to show the people, not only internationally, but also locally here, that introducing this new framework, this new policy towards having a more inclusive development is beneficial not only for firms but also beneficial for the citizens in Ecuador. So that's what we need to do over the course of the next, at least the next 2 years, to show the world and to show our citizens in Ecuador that this new framework that we're trying to use is good for everyone, not only for the big firms.
Definitely, I agree very much with you, Minister, and the world is paying attention, and we wish you a lot of success, of course, in this endeavor. And it's not only Latin America, it's not only emerging markets, it's the whole world, right? Including developed markets that have this type of political challenges, of course. Let me turn to the Q&A. We have started receiving some questions, and let me remind everyone to please post your question on the Q&A function of Zoom. Minister, we have a few more minutes where we hope you can tackle some of these questions. So let me start first with a question that says, can you comment please on trade and investment, specifically with Ecuador's major neighbors such as Colombia, Argentina, Chile, and Brazil?
Okay, yeah, that's a very general question, but I think where it's coming from. So yeah, comment on the trade and investment with Ecuador, major neighbors. Yeah, so in general, what we're seeing is that there of course there are many political changes and shifts in Latin America. Ecuador has a very pragmatic view of trade and investments. So no matter which kind of government is located at the moment in Brazil, in Peru, in Argentina, or in Colombia for that matter, we will keep, opening up and keep the best trade and investment relationships with those countries. But what we have seen in the last year is that we are getting a lot of FDI from Colombia, from Peru, and from Argentina. So some companies that didn't used to see Ecuador as a good, as a good partner for increasing trade or increasing investments are coming to Ecuador to do some prospects, to analyze specific areas, those that I just mentioned, especially renewable energy, oil and gas, of course, mining, but they're also coming to the shrimp sector, to the agribusiness sector, to the avocado sector, and they want to invest more in those areas in which they have invested back home, for the last 20 years. So Ecuador is attracting new firms and interesting, new investors and new firms to come to our country. In terms of trade in the region, I think we will see some changes in the way some countries are behaving, due to their political views towards trade. Some of these countries, especially, in Brazil, in Peru, in Colombia, they are looking to have more trade inwards and inside our region. I think those are legitimate ambitions, and this is important right now, but we cannot forget about the global supply chain. So we need to strengthen our relationship inside the region, and especially in the Andean region for that matter. But we cannot forget that after COVID, there's a total change in supply chain, and we need to look further than the region. So the concept of nearshoring, friendshoring, and everything that we're seeing in terms of the disruption in global supply chain is something that we need to take into account in order to expand our local value chains and regional value chains to look deeper into that world. So that's something that we're always looking forward to do. So talk with our neighboring countries, but always look at the northern part of the hemisphere.
I agree. It's extremely important, and I was going to say that you would be surprised by how much questions we get on nearshoring on the region, but you wouldn't be surprised. It's your job and it's your portfolio. It's a trend that we believe it's going to be there for quite some time, and it's going to shape the medium term in Latin America, because Latin America is ideally positioned to benefit from these nearshoring and friendshoring trends that we are seeing all across the world. So very, very interesting. Minister, a question on China. It says that China seems to be a major source of the new investment relationships made in the last couple of years. Is this not a danger in your view for the sovereignty of Ecuador, given China's history with other developing nations? Any comment that you can make on this front?
Yes, you know, I said that we have a very pragmatic view in terms of our foreign direct investment attraction policy and our trade policy as well. So we are about to sign a trade agreement with China. And we also want to have a trade agreement with Canada and the United States. Those two are really important for us. So it's not China versus the rest of the world. For us, both of those partners, investment and trade, are really important. In terms of investments, it is true that during the last former government, we have had many different issues with Chinese firms, you know, coming to Ecuador. And some of those firms and some of those investments are being, you know, are being under the scrutiny of different, you know, under the scrutiny here in Ecuador in different reviews. But nevertheless, we think that having investors from China in specific areas of our economy, especially, you know, in oil and gas, probably in mining, probably in renewable energy, is something that if they fulfill all the laws in terms of the environment, the labor laws, and they do a good job, I think those are investors that we can welcome to our country. But we would not do something that was done by the last former government, which is only bring firms from one specific country because of ideological reasons. We are opening all of our, you know, strategic sectors to investors from all over the world. If those investors are from China, United States, or from Europe, well, and if they fulfill all of our national laws and they have a high standard in terms of investments, those are the type of investments that we want to have in our country. And there's something that is really important here, is that once we have trade agreements with those countries, then the level of investment, foreign direct investment from those countries will increase. So that's why we're telling the United States that we need to have a trade agreement with that country, because we want the United States to keep being one of the top, you know, trade partners of our country. But the reality, Ernesto, at the moment is that until last year, the United States was our main trade partner. But at this very same moment, the main trade partner from Ecuador is China. So we will have a trade agreement with China, and this, you know, trade will only increase in the near future. And of course, it will also change not only the trade relationship, but also the investment relationship with China. So that's why we need to have more trade agreements with Canada, with the United States, with Panama, with Costa Rica, with the Dominican Republic. So that's our view of how pragmatic we need to be.
It's very clear, Minister. Thank you so much. And diversification is key, of course. And as you say, pragmatism wins the day. Let me start doing the last question, probably, given the time that we have. There's a long question here, but let me try to summarize it. Yep. It basically says that we talk a lot about open markets vis-a-vis the world, but what about the internal market and the challenges on the internal market that some participants face, particularly in the food sector? Are you also looking at competitive prices? What is the extent of market power that some local producers have, supermarket chains, and so on? Should we talk about a level playing field for the domestic market before starting talking about opening foreign markets? Is this something that your ministry is looking upon?
Absolutely. You know, it's not one or the other. If you want to have a more competitive economy, you need to have more open markets. And those open markets will tackle the issue by itself of monopolies or market power inside of the economy. So the reality here is, in Ecuador, we have one of the closest economies in the region I was telling you about this 40% figure that we use all the time. So only 40% of our exports are going to the world with low tariffs and with FTA agreements. So this is creating all sort of this disruption and and loopholes and monopolies and oligopolies in our economy, in our local economy. So that's why, and I will share probably the last slide here, Ernesto. This is our strategy. So it has three pillars. So Ecuador competes strategy, Ecuador productive, Ecuador produce, the global Ecuador, and the innovative Ecuador. So in those three areas, so first of all, Ecuador Produce is looking to reduce the cost of production in Ecuador. So reducing tariffs, reducing bureaucracy, reducing the cost of doing business in our country, more financing, more traceability, and more and keeping those changes in the long term through institutional changes. The global Ecuador is more trade agenda. We have spoken about this, more investment promotion. And the innovative Ecuador is finding more collaborative spaces. So creating a cluster strategy that didn't exist in Ecuador is being put together at these very same moments. So introducing changes in innovation in Ecuador. We know that the government is not going to innovate, but we can set the basis to create a more innovative companies and framework and ecosystem in Ecuador. So those are the three main pillars of Ecuador Competes. And so basically, we don't think that it's one of the after the other. We need to work both in opening up the market and at the same time and creating the factor conditions, the competitiveness conditions inside of our economy by reducing the costs of production to allow these companies that already exist in Ecuador to be more competitive with what's coming in the near future. And at the same time, we do believe that opening up the market, attracting more FDI to our economy will allow us to compete in a better way, to reduce costs as well in Ecuador and to bring some of the best, minds and skills, and of course, also capitals to our economy, because we are a dollarized economy and we haven't used dollar as as a competitive advantage in the last decade. So that's something that we're also looking to do.
Very clear, Minister. Thank you so much. So I see that we are approaching 5 minutes before the top of the hour, and for me, it has been really a pleasure and an honor talking with you. Your answers were very clear. We were wondering about many of these dimensions. So this talk has been fantastic. Thank you so much, Minister. With that, let me pass it to Juana Caicedo for the closing remarks. And thank you again, Minister, on my side.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much, Minister Prado and Mr. Revilla. This was an excellent program. And thank you, Minister Prado, for updating us on which is important subject, as you know, not only for Ecuadorians, but also to overseas possible investors to Ecuador, which Ecuador now is looking better and better for the foreign investors. Thank you for also all of you attending today. As Maria Rosa mentioned before, this is a very important year for us. The Ecuadorian American Association is celebrating its 90th anniversary. For the last 90 years, the Ecuadorian American Association has promoted investment, commerce, and cultural exchange between Ecuador and the United States. And with the support of the private sector, support of the government, we have been able to achieve these kind of programs. We hope and we continue working hard to help in Ecuador and to work together and to improve the relation between Ecuador and the United States. Thank you very much. And I pass it to Maria Rosa.
Thank you, Juanita. Many thanks to our speakers, Minister Prado and Ernesto Revilla, for sharing your expertise. Thank you, Minister. I was really interested in the update that you gave us about making Ecuador so much more productive, and you have a very clear strategy. So thank you so much for sharing that. Also, I would like to thank our staff, Alexandra Vaquerizo, Linda Calvet, and Lori Dominguez for their hard work in putting this program together. One very important program coming up this Thursday at 11 a.m., we will have the Peruvian American Association will host a webinar entitled Peru, next chapter. With Richard Francis from Fitch Ratings, we will have also a Peru-based journalist, Simeon Teguel, and it will be moderated by Augusto Rilova of Sherman. We also probably will have a former Minister of Finance, and we will announce it as soon as we have the confirmation. We are a non-for-profit organizations, and our support comes from membership and sponsorship. So please join the Ecuadorian American Association via replying the 2 days invitation. You can just reply there if you're interested in membership. Thank you very much to all of you for participating, and we look forward to seeing you again. Buenos días a todos y muchas gracias por estar con nosotros. Adiós.
Muchas gracias, muy amable.
Adiós.
Thank you
Muchas
so much.
gracias.
Gracias a todos.
Gracias a todos.
Gracias a todos.
Chao.
Gracias.